Hi everyone, it's Ardith. And recently I was speaking with my friend Ingrid about how I was so far behind in my Christmas cards for this year. She was in the same boat, so we decided to challenge each other to get a jump start and choose one stamp set to make 5 different cards with. I chose the Here We Come a Caroling set from Catherine Pooler Designs. It's a 6x8 stamp set with lots of sentiments, images, and design elements, so I figured there would be lots of possibilities. Before I started, I drew up a plan by marking out card front sized areas on my desk pad and then quickly stamping and sketching my designs. I created cards that are easy to recreate in multiples if needed, but still with lots of variety in design and color. And once I got started, I couldn't stop, so you get a bonus, a 6th card. The first card uses this Christmas star and some repeat stamping with Lime Ricky to create a simple but festive design. I stamped on my MISTI, but I used an acrylic block to make it quicker. You could use the MISTI door for more precision if you wanted to. I placed the star in the center of the second from the bottom row, the row with 5 stars. This meant that I could place the image right in the middle, then stamp 2 more stars on each side. This row became my anchor, and I built the tree by placing the rest of the stars in rows above and below until I had a triangle. This one is pretty equal on all 3 sides, and if you wanted a taller tree, you could just increase the vertical distance between each row of stars. When I had the tree finished, I placed my rectangle die around it to get a sense of where to place my sentiment. I wanted a stacked Merry Christmas, so I grabbed some sharp scissors and performed some stamp surgery. I held the stamp tightly with my left hand and snipped between the words. I know this isn't for everyone, so you could mask the sentiment instead if you wish. Because of the excess photopolymer around the words, I couldn't get them as close to each other as I wanted, so I just stamped them separately, using rock and red ink. This time I did use the MISTI door to make sure I got the placement exactly right. The stacked sentiment adds to the tree feeling of this geometric design. I added some tiny ornaments to the tree with the smallest star stamp that's included in the set. Next, I used my rock and red ink pad direct to paper to create a red frame for my focal panel. I laid the card base down with some 2-inch post-it tape covering the back, and then I simply swiped the red ink pad around the edges. This is the kind of thing that makes me glad I have re-inkers for my Catherine Pooler ink pads. Using them like this creates perfectly matching cardstock, but it can dry out your ink pads faster. I finished this card by simply popping up the white panel on the red card base. The second card uses the Merry Christmas sentiment and my MISTI, along with 6 colors of Catherine Pooler ink. I carefully pieced the sentiment back together near the top of my panel, and then I grabbed my peppermint scrub ink pad. I picked up the stamp with the MISTI door and then pressed down. Then I moved the panel up by 3/4 of an inch, using the markings on the MISTI to help. Next, I stamped with rock and red. I didn't bother cleaning the stamp since I was still in the red color family. And then I completely lost count of where I was at. Thank goodness for that built-in grid. I simply moved my panel back to the bottom and counted up 6 squares this time. Then I stamped it again, this time with Samba. I moved from the darker bluest reds to the lighter yellower reds. And then I did clean the stamp because I was switching to the green side. I started with the yellowest green, Lime Ricky, and moved on to Grass Skirt, and finally Mardi Gras. It's fine if your panel ends up overhanging the top of the MISTI. Just don't push down on the door in that area because that might create a dent in your panel. Once the stamping was done, I trimmed the panel with a stitched rectangle die. To finish this card, I cut a frame from sparkly silver cardstock and adhered it to a white card base before popping up the white panel in the center. Cutting out the center of the silver cardstock gives me a smaller rectangle to use on another project. Card number 3 starts with the sentiment at the bottom of a landscape panel. My stamp surgery actually gives me the flexibility to place the 2 words slightly further apart than if they were together. Once I had that stamped, I moved on to the trees. This rainbow card is inspired by one made by my friend Stephanie last Christmas. I counted out 7 colors because having an odd number allows me to start at the center and work my way out to the sides. I stamped the first tree twice with lime Ricky using my MISTI. Then I cleaned the stamp and positioned it again before stamping with something borrowed. This time I wanted some precision in my overlapping trees. This shape makes it easy to line up the bottom left corner of the next tree with the edge of the tree trunk of the previous tree. And this overlapping inking creates extra little triangles in different shades of colors. I worked my way through Flirty Fuchsia and Party Dress to the left edge. Then I went back to the center and used Limoncello, Orange Twist, and Rocking Red to complete my rainbow. I'm sorry that you get to see so much of my head in this one, but I really needed to get close to each placement to be sure it was right. To finish this card, I popped up the white layer over a black mat on a white card base. I added a few sparkling clear sequins from Pretty Pink Posh to cover some smudges and add some sparkle. For cards 4 and 5, I got really efficient, and I created negative and positive masks that will be used along with ink blending to create these designs. I started with the positive mask. I took the circle and used the same circle die to cut a chunk out to create a crescent moon. I coated the back with a good amount of repositionable adhesive before placing it onto a panel of white cardstock. I really didn't want those corners lifting as I blended ink over the top, because then the edges wouldn't be crisp. I started with It's a Boy ink and a large life-changing blender brush from Picket Fence Studios. I love to use the bigger brushes when I'm blending large areas. They give a really soft, smooth blend, even though it does take a bit longer to get a lot of color down. These larger brushes are perfect for blending out to white, which is what I did on this panel. I wanted a night sky that was dark at the top and faded out at the bottom so that my sentiment would be visible. Once I had the It's a Boy layer down, I moved on to Fiesta Blue, then on to Something Borrowed. Since I was working lightest to darkest, I didn't clean my brush at all before changing colors. I moved on to Suede Shoes for my final layer to make sure that my night sky was deep and rich. As a final step, I did give the brush a quick clean on a cloth, and I went over the whole thing one final time with It's a Boy. You'll see as it dries that this blend becomes really, really smooth and beautiful. I placed my panel into my MISTI for my stamping, and I removed the mask to reveal my crisp, clean-edged moon. I grabbed the Santa sleigh stamp. This image is the perfect thing to have over this moon, and also the holidays portion of the sentiment I wanted. I love this silhouette against the pure white moon. It's a night sky, but it's still clean and graphic. There wasn't enough room to stamp the tiny happy where I wanted it, so again I stamped it separately. To finish this card, I simply adhered the panel to a white card base and called it a day. Check out that amazing smooth blend. Moving on, now I'm using the rest of that panel that I cut the circle from to create an open circle that I can blend ink through. I should give you a fair warning. I'm creating a globe here. If you love geographic precision, you may want to turn away and skip to the next card. And if you're worried that you don't know how to make the land on a globe, I'll show you how easy it is to just create an impression of the world. I used 2-inch Post-it tape to cover the edges and to hold the mask to my panel, and then I brought another big blending brush with It's a Boy ink and went all over the circle. Then I came in with Something Borrowed just on the bottom left portion to create some dimension on the globe. Next, I grabbed my lime Ricky and a sponge dauber. My plan was just to very loosely create shapes that made you think it's the Earth. I started with a kind of triangle for South America, I added in North America, and then I went over to Europe and Asia, and then I added in Australia. And then I did a face palm because I completely forgot Africa. So I added another bit on to create Africa, and then I put a new Australia further to the east. I know I'm really taking creative license here. But you can see that these very inaccurate shapes are starting to look at least a little bit like planet Earth, and I took the mask off to get ready to stamp my Joy to the World sentiment. And then I realized I'd also forgotten Greenland. You can tell it's been a couple of years since I was in a geography class. I quickly put the mask back on, and I added a little more green at the top of the world, and felt a bit better about it. I decided that I would take the earth to the next level. I put the mask back over the globe and smooshed WOW embossing ink all over it to get it good and sticky. Then I removed the mask and sprinkled Wanderlust embossing powder all over it before heating it with my heat gun. Wanderlust is carried at Catherine Pooler Designs, and it's from WOW embossing powders. It is the most sparkly embossing powder I've ever seen, and it has the added advantage that it blurs my land masses a bit more. I put the panel back into the MISTI to add the sentiment, and this card is just about done. To add some more festive glitz, I decided to create a sparkly card base. I followed the same process as I did for card number 1, masking the card base and then smooshing ink all around the edges. But this time I used embossing ink and more of that Wanderlust embossing powder before heating it all up with my heat gun. Here's a close-up where you can see the sparkle. I popped up the earth panel over top of the sparkly card base for a bit of dimension, and that's card 5 finished. Now I'm moving on to bonus card number 6, and again I started with a panel of white cardstock. I prepped it with my embossing buddy before grabbing the little star background stamp from the set. I quickly stamped it down each side of the panel with an acrylic block. Then I grabbed some brass embossing powder from WOW, and I sprinkled it over before heating it with my heat gun until it was all melted and smooth. The brass is a little warmer in color than a gold powder. I let it cool for a moment before my next step. Next, I got out my Juniper Mist and Royal Treatment ink pads and another large blending brush. I started with the juniper and blended down each side, putting pressure on the one edge of the brush to create a darker edge. Then I went back over it with the Royal Treatment. I really love how this added a rich look to the sky. I left the panel to dry before moving on to do some more embossing. I put the panel in my MISTI and I really gave it a good coating of anti-static powder, just in case there was any dampness left from the ink blending. Then I inked up the sentiment. This set has Silent Night, Oh Holy Night, and All is Calm, All is Bright. It was really easy to cut out the O from Oh Holy Night, and then I had the whole first line to Silent Night by just combining the three together. I inked them up with WOW embossing ink and then used more of the brass embossing powder, checking for any stray bits of powder before I heated it with my heat gun until it was all melted and smooth. Look at that shine! I popped this panel up with some more foam tape over top of a white card base, and I think I'll make a few more of these for this year's church Christmas card project. So there you have it, one stamp set to create all these cards. Changing colors and techniques makes it really easy to get a lot of different looks. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up below and subscribe for even more inspiration. And then be sure to head over to Ingrid's channel to see how she responded to our little Christmas in April challenge. A link to her video is in the description below. Product links are below and also on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.